Welcome to another episode of Craft and Process. I'm your host, Nicholas Young. Today we're in Englewood, Colorado, quite literally on the fence between Englewood and Sheridan at the home of a small kombucha brewery that has become one of my favorite over the last few years, On the Fence Brewing. And I'm excited now to sit down with Lauren Wilson, the co-founder and flavor sorceress here at On the Fence. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
So first of all, let's dive right in. We go very back to the beginning. What had you interested in making kombucha?
So my daughter was born with severe reflux and had a lot of digestive problems. It led me to go back to school to become a holistic health practitioner, just so I could find an alternative to pharmaceuticals for her gut health. And so I learned all about fermented foods and how beneficial it is to overall gut health, gut flora, and gut restoration. Especially in light of the fact that our food supply is so questionable with factory farming and lots of the other things that get into our food supply, like chemicals and different things in the environment that we're not used to and our gut can't process. So kombucha kind of came across my radar 2015, 2016. We were drinking quite a lot of it and thought, we will start doing this ourselves in our kitchen. And like most people, we start in our kitchen and all of a sudden you find you have a lot of kombucha. So a lot of people said, you know what, it's fantastic. You've done a really good job with this. You should start selling it. And so 2018, we opened our first farmer's market stand and started selling it that way.
I mentioned in the opener that we're literally sitting between the town of Sheridan and the city of Englewood. But as I understand it, the brewery was established before we had this location on the fence between these two municipalities. What about the name and how did you come up with it?
So we were invited to a franchise party. Basically, people were getting together to decide whether or not they wanted to invest in franchises. It was hosted by a friend of mine, and she just sort of invited us to come and see what that was all about. We all introduced ourselves in this group and people were asking what the businesses were. And my husband and I at the time, we just weren't expecting to be front and center and people would ask us actual questions about it. And so people were very interested in kombucha, what it was all about, and said, what's the name of your company? And both of us at the same time said, well, we're kind of on the fence about that. And that was sort of a joke. When we left the party, I started to look up the phrase on the fence, and there were several articles saying, are you on the fence about kombucha? So I went, I think that's our name. So we became that. We were at a commissary for about 3 years, and we were ousted from our commissary when they sold their building. We had 30 days to vacate. We had no place to go. And this particular property where our brewery is located came up just out of the blue. And the boundary between Sheridan and Englewood runs right through this building. And so we are literally on the fence.
So if we go stand over here where you're brewing, we could be literally right in the middle between the two cities.
Exactly.
That's amazing. So at the beginning, it was almost about finding a drink that you could integrate into your otherwise healthy lifestyle that was going to satisfy a lot of the probiotic needs of your gut. Some people, I think, would probably eat yogurt, but kombucha, does it have like a wider or more rounded variety of probiotics?
Different kinds of probiotics. So, probiotics, the best part of probiotics is that they're antioxidant to the body, help to detoxify, certainly the liver and the gut at large. People call the gut your second brain, and the function of your gut can have wide-ranging consequences in your overall health and well-being. Like I said, whatever your drivers happen to be, introducing more probiotic and beneficial bacteria to your gut, no matter how you get it, is overall the best thing you can do for yourself.
Now, I also said it's a brewery. Like kombucha is a completely like alcohol-free drink. So I don't want people to hear that and then get confused, think that we're talking again about something that's good for your gut, but also like this is something anybody can have.
Well, yes and no. So there is alcohol present in kombucha. like all fermented foods, alcohol is a byproduct of the fermentation process. The difference between kombucha and an alcoholic beverage is the percentage of alcohol that's present. In order to be a non-alcoholic product, you have to be less than 0.05%. And a lot of kombucha got into trouble early on because kombucha is a living thing and it likes to keep living and keep fermenting. And so as it ferments, it does build up alcohol. So being able to maintain a certain level through the fermentation process and then to bottle it and store it, keeping it cold is an essential part of that to keep the alcohol down. And again, just as a byproduct, maintaining that percentage so it does stay under that threshold.
Did you know anything about kombucha prior to becoming a home brewer, or was it, did you have any experience, I guess, or was it just you were looking for something to suit this particular need, and then kombucha kind of came across your radar through that research?
It's enjoying a renaissance and has been for the last 10 years or so. 10, 15 years. It's not something that was hugely prevalent in the commercial availability. There was a few brands that you could get at the grocery store, but for the most part, even now, people are just like, what is kombucha? And it was brought up again when I was taking classes, kimchi, kefir, kombucha, all of these different products that you could actually benefit from overall by introducing it to your diet overall. So, I kind of played with the idea. Our son came home one day and was like, oh, I tried this fantastic drink called kombucha at one of the breweries that he likes to go to. He said, this is really great. I feel energized when I drink it. I feel refreshed. The alcohol doesn't affect me as much after I've had a beer, just kind of settles my stomach. So I thought, well, this could be something. And just out of curiosity, wanted to produce it and see what we came up with.
Okay. So it was almost an experiment just to see what you came up with and how it played out.
Yeah. Kitchen science.
And so that first batch that you put together in your kitchen, and I know, we're now sitting in the brewery and you hinted at the fact that a lot of people, myself included, start brewing kombucha in your kitchen. But how was that first batch? You put it together, you tasted it. What'd you think?
It was undrinkable. It was undrinkable. And a big part of it was that it was such a heavy fermentation. We didn't understand the science of kombucha. And I think we thought, well, you take this thing called a SCOBY, and that's a symbiotic culture of bacteria and yeast. And we just throw it in some sweet tea and let it sit and hope for the best. And, you take the SCOBY out and you cork it and you let it sit on your counter for a little bit with maybe, some fruit juice or something else in it. I put lemon juice and some sugar and I thought, this will be fantastic. Oh my gosh, it was horrible. And it was just because it was over fermented. We didn't understand timing. And just through that experimentation, we came up with a much better product.
It's funny because I feel like kombucha has so many sort of basic constituents. Like none of the individual ingredients are that particularly complicated, but getting it all in the right ratio. I guess for the folks who are not in the game and have really never, drank kombucha or tinkered with fermenting kombucha, it's starting with that SCOBY, that symbiotic culture of bacteria and yeast, some type of tea as the base, really, really sweet, but what you use and the way that you structure that mix of tea, like that's kind of the magic for your base. Am I getting onto this?
Yeah, 100%. And tea is everything. But people will start out with, regular tea bags that they get at the grocery store. Finding a nice organic is really, really good. I prefer a loose leaf tea to a bagged tea. We all start out the same way, just with whatever is available to us. I think the more you get into the craft of kombucha, that's where you start to see the finer ingredients. Basically, it boils down to a filtered water. You want as clean water as you can possibly get. Tap water doesn't always do it. So a clean filtered water, really good tea, organic sugar. and putting that culture together and then finding a nice, calm, quiet spot for it to rest and to ferment. Most fermentation takes anywhere from 10 days to 2 weeks. And that's pretty average. I think in the long run, people will do lots of different things. I've often said there's no right way to make kombucha, but there's a lot of wrong ways to make kombucha. And it's paying attention to the simple things that make the difference.
So at first batch, completely and totally undrinkable.
Yep.
How many different ways has it gone wrong over the process? Because I expect that this is like anything else that you're brewing or fermenting. You know what goes into the process and you know what ingredients should be in there, but ultimately it's about working the fermentation process and working the evolution of it all, and then hoping that you get something out that's, drinkable at the other end.
Yeah, time and temperature and ingredients all play an essential role. We've been really fortunate to have our mistakes early on. The lessons that come with brewing anything and making anything in your home. You can overcook things. You can undercook things. You can introduce bacteria that shouldn't be there. Mold, things of that nature, because all of the essential components of making good kombucha, time and temperature, and ingredients. If your temperature is too low, mold growth can happen very quickly. If anything you've left out on your counter, you can see that happen. And kombucha is no exception. Kombucha, because of its pH factor, is a safer product, but yeah, you can mess it up.
Kind of a next question for me. You say that the pH factor makes it safer. What specifically is the pH factor in brewing, and how does that play into making kombucha a safer thing to work with compared to other fermented beverages?
Well, with fermentation, yes, you get that vinegar component to it, and it's a much more acidic product. And the acidity of it, usually ours runs about 3.4, 3.2. It means that it's a safer product to drink because bad bacteria can't grow in an acidic environment.
That's an interesting point, because I think a lot of people maybe misunderstand that the higher alcohol content in beer being 5%, maybe that's what necessarily makes it safe or more like easy to drink, and it's not going to go bad. But this is another factor too. Like you're getting more vinegar, a slightly higher acidity levels. It's also making it safe. And so just like people think about heat in cooking versus, making something very, very cold in cooking, I want them to understand this is a balance, a give and a take in the whole process. One doesn't necessarily make something exclusively safer than the other.
For sure. When they first started brewing beers, it was because it was safer to drink beer than the water. And the fermentation process cleared up a lot of the negative, horrible aspects of the water, which people used to bathe in and bathroom in and everything else. In the Middle Ages, that was what you drank. Everybody drank beer.
Now maybe with all of the recent discussions around the health issues that are arising from even just, say one beer, maybe it's becoming an age where people want to drink more kombucha.
I would love that.
So talking about going from the home brewing stage to commercial production, what are some of the lessons that you learned as you started to scale up? And maybe not even lessons that you're talking about right now, but lessons that you learned in those early days as you started to scale up and operate a commercial sized operation?
Well, we were far from being the first people in our neck of the woods to have a commercial sized brewery. We started to talk about getting into a commercial operation just as COVID hit. And unfortunately, a lot of people didn't make it through COVID in their businesses. So what we had was an opportunity to partner with a lot of other local producers, local farmers, local bakeries, things of that nature, to partner up with catering companies that created farm to table boxes. So people knew where their food was coming from. They didn't have to go to the grocery store. Heirloom catering was an essential piece of our maintained growth. And it kept us going slowly and more efficiently, which I think was an advantage for us. You don't understand packaging until you have to break it down and understand, okay, where do your bottles come from and how much are labels? And, that's not even considering your product itself. It's just how do you evolve to a point where you have nutrition labels, and how do you get analysis for your product? Because those are, if you're going to be selling to the public, you have to answer those questions. We looked at different companies, different science labs to send our product to. We wound up choosing Metro State for our product development. It told us what our calorie count was, what our sugar count was, and ultimately what the alcohol and pH were going to be, which was really, really helpful. It helped us to look at that analysis and say, okay, well, we've been drinking it at this point and it's been okay. And we've sold it at farmers markets and people love it. But how do we create a product that can be palatable and within the range of regulations for a commercial outfit? We were in our kitchen. We couldn't be in our kitchen anymore. We had to go find a commissary and look at the overhead and all of those financial questions. And is this a feasibility issue? Fortunately, like I said, we were at a point where we could go slow and not have all of these expectations and learn things as we went. We watched other people spend a lot of money, invest on the front side, and wind up losing their shirts because, you owe people money at that point, and your product has to, maintain that momentum. And that's not always true for a lot of products.
Two things that I want to underscore there, because a lot of the businesses that we've talked to on this program are either small and have the intention of staying small. Spell Books is an 800 square foot bookstore, and I don't think they're going to grow to be the next Barnes and Noble. I don't think they have any aspirations of that. We talked to Michael Memzik of Sanitas, and they raised a ton of money and went not the traditional venture capital route, but they definitely did raise money to start the brewery and open the facility there in Boulder. And we're again talking about kind of a third different way to go about starting a business, trying to gather all of the accounts that you'll be able to manage, then figure out what you need to satisfy the commercial requirements to deliver on those accounts. And I think this is a really smart third conversation to have on the podcast, because people are going to hear a different way of going about this. And so it sounds like you did some initial research to figure out what kind of accounts you would even be able to onboard, how many there would be of those, and then took the product that you've been making in your kitchen to basically an educational and testing partner at Metro State,
right,
and said, okay, now I need you to make sure this is safe.
I mean, we knew it was a safe product to drink. We knew we were producing a quality product, but until you get those numbers applied to it, it still feels sort of an amorphous assumption. We use refractometers, hydrometers to take measurements, pH strips, all of those things in our kitchen. So we knew it was safe. It's just a matter of having the numbers behind it from an authorized source that kicked it into the next level for us. Like I said, there were several operations that, struggled through COVID, went national, took their product to another level. But there's a lot of compromises that come with that in order to facilitate a product that can, be more shelf stable or be more sustainable to outsourcing. It's a whole other thing.
Right. Now, I mean, this is not to say that y'all are small. Like, you're doing this on a pretty sizable scale. There's a few hundred SCOBYs in the back?
Yeah, we have lots of SCOBY hotels. They're happy, healthy little beings. One thing that separates us from a lot of people is that we're a batch brewer and not a continuous brewer. Continuous brewer has a large SCOBY that they will continually add sweet tea to keep growing their product. We have several small SCOBYs, and the scale that we grow on, we brew about 420 gallons a month in 2-gallon glass jars. So we have multiple shelves of smaller batches that keep rotating. So the SCOBYs have a chance to rest. We put them back in production. We clear out the ones that are too old or too yeast laden. So we constantly have this rotation of our source materials, and not have to wrestle with a 400-pound SCOBY that I'm sure the movie The Blob was inspired by, but that's all my opinion.
Yes, there's not a huge vat in the back. There's, 200 or so like big glass jars that are two gallons each.
Exactly.
Each holding kind of the amount of tea that needs to be fermented, and then an accompanying SCOBY with it. Now, you said SCOBY Hotel.
Yes.
Is that the fermentation jar, or is that something else?
That's something else. That's just where the SCOBYs go to rest, like take a little spa day. We have 5-gallon vessels that hold all the SCOBYs and the starter material that goes into a batch of kombucha. And it's just a hyper fermented part of the kombucha process that you will always take a SCOBY and some starter and start the process over again.
So when you pull it out of the SCOBY Hotel, it's like that. It's the concentrated kombucha mix that you then use to start everything else from that point.
Exactly.
And you'll add some more tea back to that mix, and you'll be like, okay, now this is a 2-gallon fermenting process.
Exactly.
You said SCOBY Hotels when I originally started talking to you about this program, and I was like, I got to make sure that I give you an opportunity to say that on the air.
Yeah, it's pretty entertaining when you think about it. It's the plaza.
Since you're doing this in these 2-gallon batches, how do you maintain a sense of quality and consistency across these multiple batches that you're shipping?
So we've got our process pretty dialed in after 8 years. And my husband, Jed, is responsible for all the brewing. He's pretty fastidious about keeping numbers. So we have logs for every batch that we do. He will check initial weight, so the alcohol. He will check the pH. He will make sure that the tea is at the same consistency. So he weighs all the material out. He weighs the tea. He weighs the sugar. And so his process at the end of the fermentation is to blend that entire batch out. So at the end, we have a yield of 30 gallons to a batch. Within that 30 gallons, each individual SCOBY kind of has its own personality. The final SCOBY, so there's a mother SCOBY at the initial brewing process, and that at the end, we have a mother and a daughter. So the daughter SCOBY is what grows on top. At the end of that 14-day period, we've got all of these SCOBYs within the jar. And again, because they have individual personalities, blending the entire batch affords us that consistency. So we, at the end of that blending process, we will take another measurement. So that will check our alcohol across all of those batches. So if one brewed a little hotter, we call it hot. Then if that one jar over fermented is a little higher in alcohol, once we've blended it back out again, our average has been consistent, and our final numbers are well within range and consistent every time.
So we talked about how the market of different drinks has evolved. How has the kombucha market evolved both globally and locally since your launch? And how has that changed the outlook of what you're doing here at On the Fence?
That's a really good question. there is an entity called Kombucha Brewers International, and they watch all of the kombucha numbers from across the globe. We are one of 2,400 commercial level brewers in the world, which is not a lot.
I was going to say, if you compare that to many other fermented beverage industries, that's very small.
Right. And as such, it's fairly easy to track the numbers. My understanding is that in 2024, kombucha actually increased by 23% in the market and has grown consistently since we started watching those numbers from 2018 to 2025. Kombucha commands like something in the neighborhood of $20 billion or something like that. It's a remarkable number, regardless, for the beverage industry at large. When in 2015, GT's kombucha started becoming more and more commercially available. Actually, they started back in the 90s, but we saw larger soda companies starting to buy kombucha because they were afraid of us. This healthy beverage was really starting to take a prominent place in the public demand. And so there were several California companies that were bought up by Coke and Pepsi, 7-Up in the Pacific Northwest. And I would say check my numbers to be sure, but it's grown consistently in that time frame to the point where it's pretty formidable.
What's the origins of kombucha brewing? Because I don't really have a good understanding of where it comes from.
There's a lot of debate around that. For the most part, Northern Asia tends to be the agreed origin. There was an emperor in China who demanded the Elixir of Life. So he had his wizards or sorcerers or shaman, whatever they're called, start to try to find this elixir of life. And the story goes that some bacteria got into some tea that was sitting on the counter and started to create this film on the top of the tea. And so they started to cultivate it, and it was very effervescent and life-giving. And of course, we know now that that's antioxidants and the probiotics and the electrolyte, all of these things that are beneficial to the body. And so for all intents and purposes, it is somewhat of an elixir of life. And from China, it went to Mongolia and into Russia and became this celebrated fermented product. So very similar to sourdough bread, you had these yeast cultures that were carried from family to family and across continents and along the Silk Road, and were brought into Europe as kind of this underground, my great-great-great-grandmother in Russia produced this, and so I'm going to bring it here to America or bring it to Europe, and it will be kind of the family elixir. And that's kind of the origins of it.
That's pretty cool. And having drank a fair bit of it myself, I have to agree, it is pretty close to the elixir of life. Definitely saves me after a long cycling ride.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
So we talked a little bit about the impact of kombucha on us and our bodies, but is there any impacts that we should be aware of when it comes to the impact of kombucha brewing on the wider environment?
Well, the SCOBYs themselves are probably the most impactful. These cellulose structures are starting to be experimented with vegan leather products.
Oh, that's cool.
We've actually read articles about them being used in electronics as motherboards. They're amazing conductors, apparently. So there's far-reaching experiments that are happening so they can take this product and actually keep putting it back into the world as beneficial products. For us, we make fruit leather out of our SCOBYs and the spent pulp from our flavors. So I make this amazing cranberry apple fruit leather. It's fantastic. Strawberry fruit leather, blueberry fruit leather. So you have these unique proteins and probiotic cultures that are still available to you even in dehydrated state.
That's wild. I didn't anticipate when I asked you this that it was going to be, oh, they're making circuit boards out of it.
It's really the least expected part of that.
The fruit leather is interesting and admittedly unexpected as well, but it's not on the same level as, oh, they're making electronics parts. Oh, they're a great conductor. I never would have seen SCOBYs as a great conductor. Have you faced any regulatory challenges around kombucha brewing? And if so, how did you navigate that?
Not in Colorado, fortunately. There are other states that consider kombucha an alcoholic beverage. Alcohol laws state that no matter in what stage of the fermentation process, if your product exceeds 0.5% alcohol, it's considered an alcoholic beverage, even if the finished product is not in and of itself alcoholic. So those types of regulations have definitely come up. They are a concern, and they're a huge issue for taxation. They're a huge issue for interstate commerce. And those are the things that have been a challenge to the kombucha industry at large. Fortunately, we have not had those types of interventions. If we ever had to produce documentation about our product specifically, we could definitely step in and say, these are our final numbers. This is what we do. This is the amount of juice that goes into it. Even those types of regulations are heavily scrutinized. But we have not had to face those challenges. Although we do keep up with it through KBI, what's happening in the industry at large.
I know that here in Colorado, we've had at least a few legal discussions around breweries making seltzer because it was also an alcoholic product, but was taxed slightly differently. How does kombucha fit into the existing legal structure, or does it fit well into the existing legal structure? I guess the question I'm kind of looking for is, like, Colorado is such a craft beer state. Like, it's known as a craft beer state nationally. Has the laws that have been put in place to enable that caused any sort of frustration, or have they given fuel to the business that On the Fence is trying to build here in Colorado on a different fermented beverage?
Those are great questions. I would say that COVID altered a lot of focus right off the bat. It's not come up in legislation. Kombucha is kind of the redheaded stepchild of the brewing industry at large. They don't know where we fit, and that's part of it. There's a lot of people who understand kombucha. Certainly the health department understands kombucha. A lot of their investigators have talked about it, but that's not the regulatory part of their job. They just want to make sure that things are clean, that we're addressing again those things that are of concern for disease and sickness in the population. And then the alcohol factor, people kind of put us to the side. They don't really consider us. I mean, we call ourselves a brewery. There are several brewers of kombucha in Colorado who call themselves beverage distributors and not brewers. So we haven't been challenged on that, and that's to our advantage. But there's no getting around the fact that we do make a brewed product, and within that structure, we're not recognized by the Brewers Association. We do sell our product in tandem with a lot of different brew pubs and small craft brewing outfits around the state. And partnering with them has been to our advantage and to theirs. I would say it's just mutually beneficial. But again, they don't really know where we fit. And until that's addressed, and again, it's just not a priority. It doesn't appear to be a priority within the legislative structure. So unless we're challenged, we're just going to keep making good kombucha and people will enjoy it who know what it is.
And do you feel like the Kombucha Brewers Association that you do get some representation through? It's obviously not the force for lobbying that the National Brewers Association or the Colorado Brewers Association is, but do you feel there's places where those two organizations can kind of maybe meet in the middle to create more opportunity for small brewers like you?
I would love that. I think that that's an exceptional idea. To my understanding, that has not come about. I'm sure that conversations have been had. Is kombucha just a flash in the pan? Is it just a trend? But at one point, we all thought craft brewing was too. I mean, I grew up in the 80s and people could walk up to a bar and say, I want a beer, and get one of 4 beers, brands that didn't matter. They would drink anything. And now we have, craft brewing, cold brewed coffee, coffee roasters. The passion in creation is something that has been unprecedented. And it's only in its infancy at 25 to 30 years where we've really seen that influence the public.
No, the passion for creation and the fact that we're able to sit here and have this discussion probably a stone's throw from 5 different breweries, all of which would likely have 12 different drafts on tap. It's a completely different world from you live in Colorado and so therefore you get Coors.
Exactly.
You live in New York and so therefore this is what you drink. You're out west, it's a different ball of wax. Like you had different major brewers by different chunks of the country. And I think, having more selection has also driven people's taste.
Yeah.
It's allowed people to learn more about what they like. And for me, I'm always encouraged to have more blends of kombucha out there too, because again, more choice enables me to learn more about what I like.
Sure. You have brewers that brew exclusively with green tea and honey. Those are June teas. People trying more savory kombuchas, a tomato basil kombucha. The flavor opportunities are really unlimited. And that creative mindset in brewing, I think is being addressed, especially in Colorado. We are the home of some of the most amazing craft breweries in the world. And I love the fact that we're kind of that OG factor of creativity.
Colorado, the home of fermentation.
Totally.
Most definitely. All kinds of fermentation, whether it's beer or kombucha, we love it all. How do you incorporate feedback from customers? I know you have many, and I know they're very passionate about your product. So I imagine that they're also quite vocal.
They're very vocal. They love to come in and say, I thought of this great flavor you should do. And I think, yes, absolutely. I when I get the bandwidth, I'm going to give that a try. But it's interesting. People come in with a preconceived idea of what kombucha is. They've either tried something that was over fermented and very vinegary, and we hear that all the time. I don't like things that are too vinegary. Okay, well, I appreciate that. It is part of the flavor profile of kombucha to be slightly vinegary, slightly acidic. And again, everybody brings something different to the table in terms of how they brew and their ingredients and what their vision of kombucha is. There's a lot of people who brew kombucha and they cut it with 50% water, to avoid that heavy vinegar flavor. So for some people, they come in and they say, I like to take your kombucha and mix it with half soda water. Great. Enjoy that. I always take everything and, really listen to the people that my favorite are other home brewers, because we get to stand and nerd out and just talk about what we've accomplished and what flavors they came up with and, the things that light them up about the product. It's like I said, a living thing. So it's a wonderful hobby for a lot of people. And for others, it's their solution to recovering from cancer. So it really runs the gamut, and everybody has a perspective that's valid in terms of why they enjoy the product and why they make it and why they're part of a community who celebrates it.
So if you had something to say to someone who's thinking about diving in, maybe starting their first kombucha homebrewing operation, they're standing on the cusp, so many questions, what do you tell them?
I tell them to enjoy the process, to experiment with different teas, to don't have expectations of an outcome, that nothing is irreversible, and to take notes and to pay attention to the process. People don't go into doing this lightly. They learn a lot from their very first batch, and that is that it's a scientific process. There's a lot of science. There's a lot of chemistry, and every aspect of that process is something to be enjoyed. It's so cool to watch your kombucha ferment, and to taste it at 2 days fermentation and taste it at 5 days fermentation, and to be engaged in it. Don't just stick it in a cupboard and walk away, and see what happens.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Lauren. This has been a great conversation. Where can people find On the Fence if they're here in Colorado? I know you guys, I don't think you have national distribution just yet, but here locally, where can people get kombucha and come by the tap room?
Well, to speak to that, we will always be a local product. We have no aspirations to go beyond, I don't know, maybe the Four Corners at the most. And I think a part of that is to maintain quality and to maintain a product that we're proud of. We have our tap room, 4388 South Federal Boulevard, on the fence between Sheridan and Inglewood. That was Kismet. And we're also available in small markets, coffee shops, breweries, brew pubs, all across Colorado. So we opened this spot 2 years ago with 14 accounts. We have 52 now between Colorado Springs and Cheyenne. We're available at Tony's Markets. We're available at several locations up and down Broadway, in the Englewood Broadway corridor, and as far north as Fort Collins and Cheyenne. So yeah, we can check us out on our website, www.onthefencekombucha.com, and I will update frequently what our locations are.
Awesome. And yeah, you've got some really great flavors. I wonder if you guys if you want to go through any of the flavors, just to kind of give people a taste of what they might expect here when they swing by.
We have our signature flavors. We have 5 core flavors. We have 24 flavors overall that we brew throughout the year, special seasonals and things of that nature. Hippie Chick is our hibiscus ginger, and that's our signature flavor. We also have our bestseller is Four Thieves. That is blueberry and lavender. We also have Mango Tango, mango jalapeno and lime, Fertile Myrtle, pomegranate. Triple Dog is our number 3 bestseller, and that one is raspberry, lemon, and ginger.
Awesome. Once again, this has been Craft and Process. I'm Nicholas Young. If you're watching on YouTube, there are links to On the Fence. Everything is down in the description. The same if you're listening on Spotify.